incriminating stuff, I'll let you know.
Okay.
If I rob a bank or something.
There is a kind of a basic question in Buddhism that can be stated as, is there a self or not? In other words, does the self exist or does the self not exist? But that's kind of a wrong question, because it actually takes things into the timeless.
Okay, I understand.
In the sense that if there is a self or there is not a self, we're talking about, well, what period of time are you talking about? Because sometimes there is a self and sometimes there's not a self. But the whole quality of the self is, I think, partly due to a bad translation. And I can see why that translation would get bad, because anatta, the opposite of that is atta, and that word atta is also in the Pali sometimes used for just me in a colloquial sense.
Okay. It's quite interesting.
And so some will say, well, the Buddha actually referred to himself as atta, so he could not have been teaching anatta. That's like me teaching there is no me. Well, how can me teach there is no me? The answer is that there's a slight change in definition in there someplace. And it has to do with the way that language is. And so instead of referring to myself as atta, when anatta is translated into English, remember the original translations were done by Christians, like Rouse Davies and Ivy Honer and Rouse Davies' wife. That group were the main translators, and they also compiled the dictionaries or the lexicons.
All right.
So now many of the lexicons that we have today are based upon the lexicons that they did, but they had a Christian view of things. And that so many of the words that we have now used in English to refer to Buddhism actually are Catholic words, Christian words. Possibly the best example is to translate dukkha as suffering. So that's what JC did after they caught him and nailed him up. But that suffering and sacrifice and that kind of intensity that's not what the definition of dukkha is. The definition of dukkha is much more unsatisfactory, or just relatively, well, it's really wonderful, but I want wonderful plus one. And so it's a basic state of dissatisfaction. And then they translate the opposite of dukkha as the word is sukha or sukha. They translate it as
pleasure,
sensual pleasure. But a better way would be using it the way that the Thai people use it, as an opposite. Dukkha sukha is satisfactory and unsatisfactory, or it's satisfying. In English, when you ask somebody how they are, they say fine, and that word fine has a lot of different definitions. In Thailand, they use the word sabai. Sabai, sabai, the way they say it, and it's the tone of voice that has a whole lot to do with how sabai one actually is. But this word sabai and the word sukha are interrelated in that way. And so that's one example. But this word anatta is also translated, but it seems like that the Christians in this case tried to avoid the issue. They intentionally wrongly translated it.
Mm-hmm.
And the wrong translation is self.
Okay.
But a closer, more exact translation would be to translate it as the word soul, in the sense of what is it that transmigrates?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that is residue, that is the essence of me, that survives death? So whatever it is that survives death then becomes long, long lasting, in the sense of it could survive this death, the next one, and the next one, and maybe eventually it will not be there. Okay, so in that regard, that's either eternalism or semi-eternalism, but it's long lasting and it survives death.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically what the Buddha taught against, that
Mm-hmm.
there is no perpetual eternal soul. And so this perpetual eternal soul is not only part of Christianity, but also is part of Hinduism, and they call it transmigration of the soul, or they talk about it in the sense of using the word consciousness, that it is consciousness that runs in circles from one life to the next, experiencing the results of good and bad karma. This is part of what the Hindus have to say, where the Buddha says, oh no, consciousness is dependently arising.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps coming back due to conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So if we understand the word anatta as there is no soul, what that means is that we can begin now at the very beginning to remove magical thinking from our actual practice and study of the Dhamma. Because the soul is the magical thing, the me, that that is going to, let us say, have to stand up to the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And that in Christianity, the God's going to get you, and he's going to use you as a football, and he's either going to kick you into heaven or hell, depending upon his whim.
Mm-hmm.
But it has something to do with the way that you behaved yourself or conducted your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that regard, then the God is more like a, let us say, the face of and the name of the karma machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
Because
representatives.
God fulfills the role of the karma machine,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to judge you and then do something with that you that then is the soul,
Mm-hmm.
or the Atman. So the name of Mahatma Gandhi is the great soul.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
this Atma actually has a Greek translation to the Indo-European language of the word, not atom, atom, in the sense of not cutting, but atmo, that gives us the word atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That thing which is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's all around us. Well, now the primitive didn't have quite the scientific understanding of air that we have, and yet the atmosphere of the planet Earth, which is being held in place by gravity, is actually extraordinarily powerful, bringing all of the weather.
Mm-hmm.
It can either help put your house on fire and burn it right up, or it can rain on it and put that fire out. And so this atmosphere is actually quite powerful, and it seems to always be there. Now, science knows that, well, someday it won't be, that atmosphere is there because of the gravity. If there's no gravity because everything else is gone, then the atmosphere will be one of the first things to go because it's so airy-fairy. But in the old days, they had the idea that it was there permanently. And that naturally we breathe. We breathe this air, this atmosphere. And so breathing it in is almost the same thing as breathing in God, or breathing in the breath of life, or breathing in. Here's all of those analogies. And so this is where this Atman came from, was the understanding of air and the atmosphere and the permanency of it, and that I am part of that, and therefore that atmosphere, is me, and it's not going to die when the body breaks up. That in fact they taught in the following way, that upon the breakup of the body, that the being is annihilated. That's called annihilationism, and it is exactly opposite, or more or less opposite, from eternalism. Right. All right? And then the quality of nihilism is that there was never nothing there, nowhere, no how, no way, anyway. All right? That's nihilism. Well, the Buddha was not any of those things. He was especially not an annihilationist. That's more of what the atheist believe. The atheist is that I am what I am, and that's all that I am, and when I croak, I'm dead and I'm gone. All right, the breakup of the body is in the time of the annihilation of the being. Where Catholics and other Christians will say, oh no, that being is not annihilated because it's a soul, and it's going to continue on. And so this now is one of the bigger problems with this word anatta. If it had been translated as soul, we would have a better understanding of it as to why the Buddha taught the way that he taught was anatta. And the way that he taught it was in twofold, in two ways.
Okay.
One was to show what it was not. Where that soul, or where that atta, or where that self actually does not exist and cannot be found. And that's actually kind of the early part of the teaching of Paticcia Samupada. And then later, in the later parts of Paticca Samupada, is where it has come to understand how the self actually arises momentarily as a vehicle or a vessel for suffering. That it's only this self that can suffer. If there's no self, there's nothing there to suffer. And I find that so amazing that students don't just get that offhand, that suffering and self are so interrelated that they're basically the same thing. But the way that it's taught, I think, or the way that the Paticca Samupada is translated into English makes it quite confusing.
Okay.
But in the beginning, it's taught where it is not. And where it is not is in the teaching of the five aggregates. You probably heard that, all right, or the Paticca, the five kandas. The whole point of the five kandas is to point out to the student that they are not any of those things. Now, the five kandas is very, very much like the four foundations of mindfulness: the body, the feeling, the mind, and the mind's objects. Except the mind and the mind objects are looked at in a different way. But kaya, the body, and vedana, the feelings, are the same in the satipatthana and anapanasati as they are in the five aggregates, and also in Paticca Samupada itself. All right. The body is the body. The body grows on its own, depending upon nutriment, and the nutriment that the body gets has to do with food, medicine, shelter, clothing, nourishment, breathing, air, all of those kind of things. But what it does not have is a me who runs and owns the thing. And yet most people are confused about that, and they think I am the body. And so here's the very sequence of events. I am the body, and I want to get laid. And I can't get laid if I'm ugly. Therefore, I've got to make myself handsome. And when I make myself handsome, then I can get laid. Can you hear all of the ignorance in there? There's ignorance at every step along the way of that. And especially the step is if I can become handsome, I'll get laid. Now,
Yes,
the thing
magical
that's really
thinking.
interesting is that there's an awful lot of ugly guys that get laid anyway. So they either didn't try to make themselves beautiful, or they tried and failed, but in either case, they got laid, but it hadn't have to do anything with looks, that things are more complicated than that. But the point is that the biggest one is if I can make myself look beautiful. That's real magical thinking. And that you can see how many industries are built around that. The clothing industry, especially fashion, swimwear. And sometimes something less than that is even more expensive. And so how about cosmetics and face makeup and painting the face, thinking, oh, if I put enough paint on my face, then I can be beautiful, and then I'll be pleasing, and then I'll get what I want. But in all cases, it's the experience that I am the body. And yet no one can actually take control of the body. For instance, you can't make yourself taller or shorter. You can't make yourself 70 years old. You can tell the lie that you're 70, but you can't become 70, nor can you become 13, nor can you go an inch taller. And in fact, in many other cases, examples of that would be like a diet. That so much suffering is done in the world over people trying to go on a diet, and they wind up hurting their body, and at least they're feeling bad because they can't diet, and so then they fuss at themselves, and just all kinds of mental suffering come over people trying to be on a diet. It's almost like the ones that are the most successful at dieting are the ones who suffer the most. They had to do a lot of I, me, and my, and this is my body, and I'm going to starve it, and all of that kind of stuff. And so they wind up doing the most suffering over a long period of time in the delusion that I am the body. So this is what the teaching of the kandas is all about, and yet many people who believe in rebirth think it's the five kandas that are reborn. When Buddha was really hard and hammered hard that is not the self.
Yeah, I think there's a sura about that. He was railing on a poor guy. Okay, no.
And so the next kanda is Vedana, are the feelings. And yet very few people feel the way they want to feel. They almost always feel according to the habits that they've developed when they were young and immature and subject to the forces of society and having no wisdom. They chose to feel the way that society had taught them to feel rather than feeling the way that they wanted to. But in either case, they're still now out of control. They can't feel the way that they want to feel. They don't even know that they could. And so they say, oh, well, I feel this way, as if I own those feelings. But the reality is that if there's any self there, it's the feelings that own you, not
Yeah.
owning the feeling. That the feelings are actually in control, and they come up out of the Sankara, out of the past, and without any meditation practice, people are actually then owned by the feelings, thinking they own the feeling. An easy way to look at that is buy a house. People will buy a house, and when they buy the house, they think they own it.
Okay.
No, the house owns them. The house has a sticky toilet, and they say, all right, you're my
Yeah.
servant. You go fix that toilet. And the only way I can get you to fix that toilet is by telling you that that toilet is yours. So now that that's your toilet in your house, you go fix it. And so in that regard, the house owns the person. I realized that so long ago. People have asked me from time, not recently at all, but at one time, they would say, is that your dog?
No, it's human.
Oh, I'm the dog's human. I'm the servant here. The dog owns me. When the dog wants out, I'm the one who
Yeah.
has to go open the door.
Yeah.
I'm the one that has to feed the dog. So I'm one who is owned by the dog, and yet people will think that they're pet owners. No, they're not.
Yeah, and in the city, you have to pick up its crap. If you take it for a walk, you have to have these little bags and pick up its crap if it craps in the summer.
Not only right. So in that regard, even the dog poop is me.
Yeah.
It's mine.
Uh,
Well, this is what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was taught. He got this right out of the sutras. It's there, but the way he expressed it is, nothing is worth clinging to as I, me, or mine. Now, basically, what he's pointing at is clinging is at that point in time when the self arises. So if we're not clinging to anything, the self does not arise. But it will not actually be there simply because of the feelings. That there's no self associated with feelings. They do basically what they want to do. The same thing is true with the mind. I've got my mind on something. No, the mind is on something, and you don't realize that you can't stop it. You do not have control of the mind until you start to practice sati. Only then do we begin to take control of the mind. So in that regard, the mind literally owns the you. The mind determines whether the you is created or not, depending upon the feelings and the thoughts that are in the mind. So let's break that mind down into a little bit deeper quarters to look at the five aggregates, and we find that the mind actually has the features of consciousness and perception and all of our memory systems. Now, in the Pali, they use the word sankara, but it's quite easy just to think of it as all of our memory, all of our past, all the stuff that we collected together. And that, in fact, is what the word sankara means, is the stuff that we've picked up along the way, what we have collected together. All right, so that collection of stuff, then, all of our memories, all of our the language we speak, and the feelings we have, all of that is in sankara and can come up when it's time for it to be processed. And so consciousness is dependently arising. Now, there's actually, I'll go so far as to talk about there's two kinds of consciousness. But in the beginning, the right way to talk about consciousness is that when the eye sees an object, when the eye sees the object is seen. So the quality of being able to see or seeing is a kind of consciousness. When a sound reaches the ear and the ear picks it up, then that quality is the quality of hearing. All right. So in that regard, there is no self in the actual hearing. That's all mechanical and biomechanical, depending upon the atmosphere. Exactly.
Okay.
And so the sound waves come, they hit the ear bounces back and forth, it creates a set of nerves, the nerves go into the brain, and there they're processed. Maybe. Unless you're well skilled in the Dhamma, practicing Anapanasati well, we could just leave the hearing as merely the heard and not process that data. Or we can let the scene be merely the scene without processing it. And the way of thinking about that is by not taking anything as an object, not listening to something, but rather hearing whatever is there, all of it. Not when we use the eyes to see something, we go into a state of gaze. Gaze so that anything can catch our attention, but only instantaneously and only momentarily, and then something else. And so the eyes become a dance. That kind of consciousness is just dancing from object to object to object like that, without staying at an object long enough for it to become processed.
Okay.
There is no self in any of that. There is no self in consciousness. It's just seeing. It's just hearing. And now we look at that processing, and the processing, we can use the word perception. And in the Pali, there's both the word vanya and also the word Nama-Rupa.
Okay.
And Nama-Rupa is the name and form. And what Nama-Rupa means is that I'm going to take that outside object that I saw with consciousness, use my old memory bank, and process that to make it an internal object. So it's the actual thing outside is Rupa. But what I actually see on the inside of my mind is the Nama, or the manufactured item. But neither the real thing out there nor the manufactured item is me, nor is the item on the outside and the internal representation me. Not only that, but it is also temporary and fleeting, so that what's on the inside of the mind, which is, by the way, the Pali word is salayatana.
Okay.
And this salayatana is actually, you can see how it's related to the word atana, but the atana are the sense organs. The eye, the ear, the touch, the proprioceptic, the being, the ability to feel the breathing, the taste of food, the feeling of all the food inside the mouth when we're eating, whether the nose is stopped up and we have trouble breathing and we can see that. All of that is using just the senses, which is the atana. There's also a sixth one, besides the five of eyes, ears, touch, taste, and smell. There is also a sixth one, which is the mental part, which is just the ramblings of the mind.
Okay.
Whatever's going on inside the mind that is not, in fact, part of the atana on the outside. It's its own sense organ. And so that becomes the mind as the sixth sense, but in all cases, the salayatana and the atana are not the same.
Okay.
They're not the same because the atana is actually a sense, and the salayatana is the internal representation of that sense. It's almost like an idea comes in a split second, but when you talk to yourself about the idea, that's now taking it out of the atana, that flash of insight, and describing it, making it into a concept, which is now the salayatana.
All right.
Okay, now salayatana is actually the second kind of consciousness.
Okay.
And the philosophers will speak of this kind of consciousness, which is that when what we mean is that we realize something, but really we don't realize anything.
We just
If
describe
I
it.
see
Or,
that tree
yeah.
and then realize that tree, or realize that it is a tree, does not mean that now a tree is growing out of my skull. No.
Uh-huh.
So it's not realized. The better word would be mentalized.
Mm-hmm.
That I have seen that tree and now I mentalize that tree as if I'm having an internal creation of that tree on the inside. Now, here's a really important point with that, and that is that that means that human beings, by their very nature and design, do not live in the real world. They live in an internal representation of that real world, because the real world, without any processing, has no meaning to it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sensual pickup, sort of like static on a radio, or maybe even radio that's playing, but there's nobody in the room to hear it. All right. So what we actually now are looking at is this Atana and the Salayatana are basically two different kinds of consciousness. And so the kind of consciousness that we use when they say, oh, I just realized something.
Uh-huh.
Or another way of saying it is, I see that tree, or I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Even calling it a tree is doing a bit of processing. But then the other one, which is more deeper, is, I see what you mean.
Okay.
I see what you mean now. That's actually Salayatana.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the funny thing is that imagine that the young man gets out of his car, goes into the 7-Eleven or some shop to buy something, and while he's in there, he sees what he believes to be a girl who is drop-dead gorgeous. But he's too shy to knock her up. So what he does instead is he gets back into his car, and now he's thinking about her. But he's not thinking about the real girl. He's thinking about his mentally constructed image of that girl. And that's what he falls in love with.
Mm-hmm.
Boys don't fall in love with real girls.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
fall
just the
in
idea
love
of
with
them.
imaginary girls, the girl that they made up in their own mind. And that not only is what is a kind of consciousness, a kind of realization, but that's also what hits us, what contacts us.
Okay.
Okay? So the perception, or the Nama-Rupa, then uses all of our past knowledge and things like that. For an example would be, what is beauty? Well, my ideas of beauty are stored.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will use my understanding of beauty to process the image that I saw so that I could concoct a beautiful girl. And so I concoct on the inside, and that is what contacts us, or in this regard, that's what the boy falls in love with, not the real girl.
Uh-huh.
The real girl may have 2 kids, she's got 2 ex-husbands, and a mother who hates all of her boyfriends, and you're going to be number 3 if you get stuck in that nest. But see, he can't see any of that, and because he hasn't seen it, that's not a part of the beauty he's created. And as they say, first impressions are the ones that stick. If he knew in advance, if he'd gotten her resume before he saw her photo or actually saw her, he may not be interested at all. But now that he's made a mental concoction of her, facts, who wants facts? All right, so this is why we can see that there is no self in that perception system. There is no self in the memories. They might be my memories. They might be the memories that are stored in this brain. But those memories are not the self. Because we forget things. If what I remembered was actually me, then if I forget something, then I've lost part of. I'm not there anymore because I forgot who I was. And that happens in some cases. So, that's what contacts us. And then the contact is where feelings arise.
Okay.
But also the feelings that arise are not me. That I am not the feelings. I cannot feel the way that I want to feel. I feel according to what this mental map that I've just constructed tells me to feel.
Okay.
But I don't have much choice about how I'm going to feel, not at this level of ignorance. I have to feel according to the way that I've just been instructed to feel. But guess what? The way that I'm instructed to feel right now actually came up out of my own past. I say my own past, but it's not a self that's the past. It's just this is where it's stored. So here it is. That's what's processed. And so that gives rise to the Salayatana, or the concept of the consciousness that then contacts the feelings. Well, guess what? The feelings that we have now are more than likely going to be the feelings that we brought up from the past, and not the feelings that would, in a wiser way, be associated with what I actually saw. So we don't feel about what's happening in the present moment. We just feel the way that we're in the habit of feeling. That's the teaching of Paticcia Samupada. And I go, wow, the Buddha was just so marvelous to have figured that out. And we are not those feelings. But if we are wise to those feelings, then we can begin to change them. You don't have to feel the way that you have been feeling. You begin to change the feelings. An example of that is the child is having a tantrum. But mom does not have to have a tantrum. She's in the habit of having a tantrum. And when she is in her own tantrum that got started because the kid's in his, I'm going to have mine again. And so she raises her hand like, I'm going to smack you, you little tantrum. And so now he's afraid, but the whole cycle then will get repeated 20 years later. But it'll also, every time the kid has a tantrum, mom's going to behave the same. But maybe mom goes to a meditation class, and then she raises her hand and says, wait a minute, why am I doing that? And then a big smile comes on her face, and she looks at the kid who's still having his tantrum, and I say, okay, I'm out of my tantrum. You come out of yours, too. That's a mighty interesting bellow you have. Let me see if I can do that bellow, too, except we do it in playfulness. So now the child is, and you do that back right to them. They begin to see how ridiculous they actually are. To begin to imitate them with a great big smile on our face. And that will pull a child out of it. But as long as mom goes into the tantrum, so at that point in time, if mom is wise to the way she's feeling, she can change the way she feels right there. But
With
if they're
sati.
not, sati, exactly. Here I come to save the day.
At the cavalry.
God comes along the way. All right, so the sati comes, and we can just choose to feel the way that we want to feel, but most people are not in the habit of that. You can have a flash of insight, a flash of sati, but doing the right effort to come out of those feelings and into more appropriate feelings takes effort. That's right effort, right at that point in time. So, what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is talking about, he says wisdom at the point in contact will give rise to wise feelings. In other words, if we know what's going on before feelings arise, then we can manage them easily. Once the feelings have arisen and we see them then, now it's going to take more effort. But if we don't take the effort, if we stay ignorant, then the feeling of I like it becomes I want it. and I want it becomes I gotta have it. So with the kid having the tantrum, I don't like it. I want it to go away, and now I'm going to make it go away.
Okay.
That I'm going to make it go away. I'm going to smack you. Is when we begin to start clinging. That's the clinging. We don't have to actually smack the kid for that arm to come up. That clinging just came up. And with the clinging is now the definition of I am the mother here. There's with the self coming up. And with that is the real dukkha, not just the feeling of I don't like it, but now the unsatisfactoriness of I don't like it. Now that brief is the entire sequence of Paticca Samupada that we've just gone through, starting with consciousness, perception, salayatana, going to pasa, then feeling, and from vedana feeling goes into upadana, or no, tanha.
Okay.
Upadana. Tanha is first. Tanha is thirst. Tanha is I want it. Tanha is I don't like that kid screaming. Upadana is when I actually grab hold of it, when the arm comes up. And maybe the stuff that you shut your mouth, that kind of language is the actual clinging. And with that is where the self comes in. It arises dependent upon the way we feel and the level of ignorance that we have. At this level of feeling, guess what? Is I like it and I don't like it. What we're talking about here is the second noble truth. This is exactly at that point in time when it instantaneously comes up that I like it or I don't like it. And if I know that I like it, I can do something. But if I'm ignorant to the fact that I don't like it, if I'm not watching what I'm doing, if there's no sati there, then it goes down this very steep slope from I like it, I want it, I gotta have it, I'm the owner, and that's where the I comes in, is born at that point, and from there comes dukkha. So the self is actually a vehicle for suffering. And it comes from ignorant feeling. Now, I would like to stop and point out that there's a third kind of feeling. And the third kind of feeling is a feeling, it's an actual feeling. It's not a neutral feeling. It's real. But it comes up in the sense I'm not sure whether I like it or not.
Okay.
I'm confused. There is doubt. I don't know which way to go. It needs more investigation. There's unsurety there. That doubt can become fear, the fear of the unknown. This is basically the source then of tribalism. If I'm not sure who those folks are, they must be dangerous. Exactly. Us here, if I know who you are, you're part of us. You're part of the me. But if I don't know who you are, now you're one of them. You're an outsider. You're dangerous. You're not to be trusted. And by doing that, I'm suffering. Why am I suffering? Because I'm judging them out of my ignorance. But instead of just recognizing, hey, I'm not sure who they are. Let's wait and find out. Let's not judge them in advance. Let's see what's going on. But now we can take that away from just people and use it for anything that happens. Because it happens on a regular basis that we're just not sure. We don't know. And that feeling of not knowing is actually uncomfortable. So you can also go so far as to say there's a fourth kind of feeling, and that fourth kind of feeling is wise feeling, and that it can be wise good feeling, wise bad feeling, or
Okay.
wise ignorant feeling, or undecided feeling, but it's wise, and that's what makes it powerful, is because we now have a choice because we're wise to this, that these other kinds of feelings are ignorant, and they all bring suffering. It would seem natural that, oh, well, we actually have then a good feeling, a bad feeling, and a neutral feeling, or one that we're not sure of. But if you look at it from the perspective that I just said, oh no, if we are not wise to that feeling, it's going to bring suffering.
Okay.
If we don't like something and we're not wise to that feeling, it too is going to bring suffering. But if I like something ignorantly, then I'll want it. And by wanting something that I don't have, now that becomes suffering. All three of the feelings wind up in Paticca Samupada as going to suffering. There's not one feeling there other than the one that's wise. And so this is much of what much of Anapanasati is all about, is for us to become wise to our feelings by watching closely from a state of satisfaction. If we're in kind of an ordinary state, the way that we are all the time, and feelings come up, they're kind of hard to manage because we're there with them anyway. But if we can bring the self, bring the mind together, the factors together for the first jhana, so that the mind is free from hindrance, it's free from all of those feelings, and the mind is satisfied. The mind is feeling really, really powerful, really, really strong. The lion, the attitude of the winner, and the satisfaction that comes there. So we get ourselves into that state. Then when feelings come up, now we're going to see them wisely. That this is a wise way of looking at the feelings, is because we're in a state of satisfaction with the mind fit for work.
Okay.
If the mind is not fit for work, then we're going to miss these feelings, and we're going to wind up being ignorant about them. They're going to go through their normal flow. And so we go back to that idea about, can you feel the way you want to feel? The answer to that is yes, if you're paying attention right now, and you are taking on right effort, gladden the mind, take a deep breath, and become satisfied. And now that I'm in a state of satisfaction, that's a different kind of feeling, the feeling of satisfied. It's actually a good feeling, but it's not a feeling that leads to want, because if you want something, that's being dissatisfied. If you're in a state of satisfaction, that's a state of pleasure that we like, and we're satisfied with it. This is what we mean by the word sukha. It is not just I like it or sensual pleasure, because sensual pleasure that is unfulfilled is dukkha.
Exactly. Okay.
This is not sensual pleasure. What this is it's a state of satisfaction, sukha, which is exactly the opposite of dukkha. And with the mind sharp, that you can apply it to this and keep the mind sustained at this state. So this is how Paticca Samupada and the five aggregates fit directly right in with Anapanasati practice. It's all basically the same thing.
All right.
And it's so funny that the West is really so confused about what this atta and anatta are all about, because it's badly translated as the word self, rather than translating it as the word soul. If we understand that this is the soul, then we can see there is no soul, no real hardcore, everlasting owner of this body. That thing doesn't exist. That the one who owns the body is a mental process that owns the body. The same thing with feeling. That is not an eternal soul that owns those feelings. No, it's basically that the self arises from the fact that these feelings are out of control. So who owns that dog? The answer is the dog owns the owner. In that regard, the ownership is upside down, and there is no soul to be found there anywhere. And so with the understanding that there is no eternal soul for the feeling, no eternal soul for this consciousness does not go from life to life to life. It's a mental process that happens associated with the eye and seeing, the ears and hearing, thought and thinking, touch and sensation and odors and the inputs that we have. That's what consciousness is. Or consciousness is the internal representation of that data after it's been processed. But neither the software that did the processing nor the data bank that was used to do that processing is me. There's no self in there anywhere. It's an illusion. It's a delusion. And it's instinctual that this happens. So the self arises instinctually because of feelings. For instance, the feeling of fear will give rise to a self. Because if the feelings of fear arise but not a self, then who is it that feels afraid? The answer is this is just fear, but I'm not afraid. It's just bodily sensations associated with the feeling of fear. But for me, it's not a feeling. It's something to look at, something to watch, something to see. And so this is what we have to look at is, who am I? The answer is, it depends upon whether you're making yourself up or not. Because whoever you are is whoever you make up in the moment. But if you were to take a piece of paper and write down the attributes of who you are, I bet you did it tomorrow, every day you would give a different list. Because the attributes of who am I change from time to time, from day to day, sometimes from minute to minute. That I am hungry for coffee, and on the way to the coffee pot, I stepped on a tack, and now I am hurting foot. My original intention was to be, I want coffee, and now I've forgotten all about the coffee. So that's how the self changes that quickly.
Yeah, that's so funny when you say, I am angry, you are the anger. I'm hungry, you are the hunger. You can identify with that.
Yes, we identify with those things. So I am hungry. We say, I am hungry. I am angry. No, the angry feelings are there, and you're so stupid that you're not looking at them well. And so you begin to own them thinking, I am angry. And that's the convention of the language. The language tells us to speak like that instead of anger, huh? Nobody ever does that. They come up with, I am angry, I am sad, I am hurt. Where there's no real self like that, no permanent self there. That in fact, the self arose along with the anger. As the feeling of not liking grew into the clinging called anger, the clinging called anger is almost like owner. Once we actually are clinging to it, it's almost as if we've taken a hold of it. Now we own it. Well, the important point is that an ownership requires an owner, not just the owned. Think about that. That ownership requires an owner. That's where the self comes in. That's the owner. The ownership creates the owner. If there's no ownership, if there's no clinging, then there's no self to arise. How can we not cling? Through wisdom, through watching. Wakey, wakey. Start watching what's going on, and then we can avoid. Oh, wait a minute. Never mind. So, today we were able to cover two topics. Normally, I would cover the five aggregates in one lecture and
Yeah, it
Paticca
was.
Samupada as a second lecture, but I thought that you were ready for getting them both.
Oh yeah, it was quite an interesting seeing the connections between them. I'm gonna rewatch this a couple of times. I think there's some
Right.
stuff that might have passed me by, or
So, Anapanasati and the four foundations of mindfulness and the Eightfold Noble Path, especially the second Noble Truth. So, I'll just put the whole Noble Truth in there together, shows us how to practice the five aggregates, to see them as no self, to recognize where the self arises from, to recognize then how the mind actually works. And this has all been under the umbrella of the Four Noble Truths. This is just how the whole thing fits together. And it can be said in just one statement, like Dukkha, Dukkha Nirodha. Or, my favorite is, don't worry, be happy. That's the entire teaching of the Buddha. 4 words, don't worry, be happy.
Yeah, the Four Noble Words.
And so that's the whole sum total of it, and it fits together as a nice, neat package. And we then know, well, there's a key point then. And that key point is to get into a state of satisfaction and stay there, keeping that mind sharp so that we can see what's going on and respond to it with wisdom rather than with ignorance. But things are still going to come up. It's not like that, now that I've gotten familiar with these feelings, they're going to stop. They're not going to stop. This stuff is instinctual. You do not want to destroy the instinct, or you might wind up dead. That self-preservation instinct has a duty to perform, and that is to keep you alive. So sometimes we have to be wise to pay attention to it, because it may be in the process of keeping us alive, but most of the time it's just making us afraid when there's no reason to be afraid. Things are not dangerous. And so this is why we have to use that frontal cortex to kind of manage that automatic terror machine that we carry. And so that's all there is to it. But can you remember?
Yeah, that's the catch.
That's the catch. That's where we practice over and over and over again to get ourselves into a state of really nice. This is nice. And many people will say, okay, well, I can do that. What's next? Wait a minute. If you can get yourself into a state of satisfaction, but you want more, sounds to me like you're not quite satisfied yet. Let us get ourselves into a state of satisfaction, practice doing that over and over again, and the skill of satisfaction will grow. Your ability to give yourself great pleasure, mental pleasure, will grow. But if you promise that to the student, then they'll lust after it. And by doing so, now they're wanting something they don't have, and so they say, this is not satisfying enough, I want more. No, we actually need to practice it the other way around. Become satisfied with less. Because if we can become satisfied with less, that means that now our capacity for satisfaction is growing. And so this is a way of looking at it. Yeah, this is good. This is really good. I've had enough right now. Don't want no more. I become satiated, satisfied. And so this is the way to practice, as if everything was hunky-dory, but not magically marvelous. That the marvelousness will grow, but it's still real, as to the point of my own capacity for how I can, let us say, put the mind in the state of being at great ease, at great integration with the environment, to be fully into the senses, so that consciousness is now not grabbing hold of any object. The consciousness is just free floating. And so it kind of visits all of the senses. And so it just kind of floats around. So one instant I'm feeling the air on my right arm, and then I feel the air on my right leg, and then I feel the sense of the arm touching the cloth, and I can feel the breeze. I can see the trees as they wave in the breeze. But talking about this makes it into a concept. The experience of it happens much faster than the description of it. And so you just sit there without taking any object and just letting it kind of all come in and experience it in great satisfaction. That's the state to practice. And the joy will actually increase over time. Satisfaction will grow, because it actually is a skill to be developed. Happiness is a skill to be developed. And the only way to develop it is by being happy with the happiness that you have now. If I'm happy but it's not good enough and I want more happiness, wait a minute, I just destroyed what happiness I did have.
Right.
So it's kind of catch-22. But if I'm satisfied with this, then it'll begin to drift, and now I'm satisfied with this. Oh, this is really nice, and as I'm more and more satisfied, it gets higher. Okay. But if I'm here and I want it to go up there, then I'm
Yeah, it should be kind of like a snowball and not rolling a boulder uphill.
Right, exactly. It's a snowball that rolls downhill all by itself. Sisyphus is the one who's trying to push it back up to the top because he wants something rather than enjoying the ride. Literally, it is really all downhill. There comes a point in one's practice when you just kind of let go with the struggle, and now it's just all easy.
Okay.
All downhill. So, do you have any questions?
Yeah, but I think I might know the answer to this one. About maybe contemplating Paticca Samupada. Maybe, so my idea of it would be gathering the factors together and then staying satisfied. Then when you notice something come up, like having the intention beforehand, not while you're doing it, to catch the stuff, and maybe the mind will just be more attentive to it and catch it. Can you catch it at the moment of contact in first jhana? Okay.
Yes.
So that's about it, right? Or
it really is easy.
Yeah. Okay. All right then.
And so while you're sitting there, instead of, like they use the word contemplate, don't contemplate Paticca Samupada, but rather from time to time you will actually see a particular point of it. You can actually see that, oh, this is consciousness. Oh, I can see that I'm processing. This is perception. Now, the instant that you see it, it's not the same thing as the description of it that comes later. That takes a lot more. But it's that instant where you actually see it.
All right.
You can actually see this Paticca Samupada in practice. You can see you're clinging. And in fact, that's the right way to practice it, is we start at the very end of it, in the sense of, now that we've done it in forward order, the way to practice it is, because we're slow, we can only catch it at the caboose. But as we get more skilled, we'll catch it earlier and earlier and earlier, so that eventually we get it all the way down to the consciousness so that we're not taking any object.
Mm-hmm.
But along the way, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa points out an extraordinary point, the one that's the most important, and that is mindfulness at the point of contact, so that our feelings are wise feelings rather than ignorant feelings.
Okay.
So when a feeling arises, know it. Know that feeling as it arises.
Yeah, alrighty then.
Just like as part of that description was when the mother sees her hand go up, she says, "Wait a minute, I've gotten too late now," because that's already to the point of clinging. But at least she saw it at the point of clinging. Later, when she sees the child angry, having a tantrum, you can say, "Ah, I see that. I'm going to take a deep breath before I even engage with the child." And that's getting a little earlier. And so that's the way to practice, is how soon can you catch things? And the skills, as they grow, will allow you to catch things earlier and earlier.
Oh, okay. It happens naturally if you keep doing it. I don't think you have to do something for this. All right.
Well, right effort is a bit of doing. It does take some right effort.
All right then.
Until it becomes on its own. It's like you get the ball, finally you get the ball rolling. And now it kind of rolls along by itself. All right, Catalin, well, let's finish it off then. This has been a really interesting one. We haven't talked about Paticca Samupada. I haven't talked about the student about Paticca Samupada in a while now. So
okay.
We'll see you.
Thanks a lot. See ya.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.